The year is 1937. The Marco Polo Bridge incident begins the Second Sino-Japanese War. Construction is completed on the Golden Gate Bridge. The Hindenburg bursts into flames while attempting to land in New Jersey. And Walt Disney's first animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, is released. But above all, you just got a new camera, which leaves you with the question, how do you use it? This is a Kodak Jiffy 620. A 6x9 folding camera manufactured from 1933 to 1948. The Jiffys were a relatively inexpensive series of folding cameras that were only a modest step above the various versions of Brownie box camera from the same time period. These came in a 620 version and a 616 version, and there were two different series. The first, lasting from 1933 to 1937, featured a silver Art Deco design on the faceplate, while the second series, like this one, lasting from 1937 to 1948, went for a far less ostentatious look, covering the faceplate with the same black leatherette material found on the rest of the camera. However, mechanically, the two versions are practically identical. Unfortunately, there is one major hurdle to using this camera today, and that's the fact the 620 film the camera was originally designed to take hasn't been manufactured since the 1990s. However, it's not all doom and gloom. As compared to many discontinued film formats, this is actually a relatively easy problem to solve. A 620 film is exactly the same as 120 film, which is still produced today. The only difference between the two film formats is the fact that 620 uses a slightly smaller spool than 120 does, which means you can either re-spool 120 film onto a 620 spool or use a cut-down 120 spool in lieu of the 620 one. There's plenty of information out there around both methods, but the specifics of each are beyond the scope of this video. To load the camera, open the back by sliding the metal latch towards the arrow labeled Open on the top of the camera and pull open the back. Place your empty spool in the slot on the top of the camera where the winding knob is, and place your film spool in the slot on the bottom of the camera. Then, slowly begin to pull the end of the backing paper around the back of the camera, making sure to keep the roll from unraveling, and then tuck the end of the backing paper into the slot on the take-up spool. Make sure your take-up spool is a 620 spool and not a trimmed-down 120 spool, as 620 spools have a different sized groove for the winding knob to lock into. If you use a trimmed-down 120 spool, it will not turn properly and you won't be able to advance the film. Once you've tucked the end of the backing paper into the take-up spool, close the back of the camera and advance the film forward until the number 1 appears in the red window on the back. To open the bellows, push down on the round silver button on the side of the camera and the bellows should pop out, then pull out on the faceplate until they're fully extended. The back of the faceplate features a small stand that can be folded down to allow the camera to sit in either the portrait or landscape orientation. To close the bellows, push down on the faceplate until everything folds back into the camera and the faceplate clicks into place. The shutter speed is controlled by a lever located on the top of the faceplate. There are two settings, T and I. I stands for instant and has the shutter speed around 1/40th of a second. T stands for time, meaning the shutter will stay open until the lever is pushed down a second time. This camera has no tripod mount, so when using the time mode, you'll want to use the small folding leg on the back of the faceplate and set the camera on a stable surface. This camera has a built-in 95mm lens with 3 aperture settings, f11, f16, and f22. These are controlled by the small metal tab located on the side of the faceplate. In the tab's most depressed position is f11, the middle position f16, and the furthest extended is f22. This camera has 2 focus settings, 5 to 10 feet and 10 feet and beyond. To adjust the focus, rotate the end of the lens so that the white dot aligns with the desired setting and the lens has been rotated to its full travel. For focusing on objects closer than 5 feet, the number 6A close-up attachment can be used. The attachment slips onto the end of the lens like so. With the attachment on, the focus distance will be reduced to 3.5 feet when set to beyond 10 feet, and 2 foot 8 inches when set to 5 to 10 feet. Similar to many other cameras of the era, the focusing mechanism is not connected to the viewfinder, meaning that for focusing on closer objects, you will likely want some type of measuring device, such as a tape measure or optical rangefinder. This camera features 2 waist-level viewfinders for composing your image, one for portrait and one for landscape. To use the viewfinders, hold the camera around your waist level, bracing it against your stomach, or place it on a stable surface such as a table or railing and look straight down at the viewfinder. The image you see inside the viewfinder will be a mirrored approximation of what your final image will look like. To take a double exposure with this camera, simply fire the shutter a second time without advancing the film, as there is no mechanism to prevent double exposures on this camera. Once you've taken your 8th and final shot, advance the film forward until you reach the end of the backing paper. You'll be able to tell when you've reached the end of the backing paper, as usually it will change colors or be marked with some kind of symbol. You'll also notice the paper no longer completely covers the red window on the back of the camera. Once you reach this point, stop, unlatch, and open the back of the camera in subdued light. Being careful to prevent the film from unraveling, remove the end of the backing paper from the spool and finish wrapping it up, sealing it using either the attached sticker or an elastic. My experience with this camera is probably best exemplified by the saying, "The best camera is the one you have with you." In terms of technical capability, about the only thing this camera has going for it is the high resolution you'll get out of the large 6x9 negative. Otherwise, this camera is pretty easily outclassed even by many other cameras of the period, and has a lot of downsides to it. The limited amount of adjustability in settings to control exposure means that this camera really is only going to work outside or near bright windows or in very brightly lit rooms. The relatively slow max shutter speed of 1/40th of a second means that properly bracing the camera is extremely important, as it's very easy to get blurry images due to the force required to push down on the shutter lever. It also means that you are not going to be taking any kind of action shots with this, as fast motion is going to be very blurry. The time mode also has a lot of drawbacks, due to the fact that this camera doesn't have a tripod socket or a way to attach a cable release, meaning that you're going to have to be very careful not to bump the camera, which is easier said than done. The viewfinders on this camera aren't the easiest to work with, as they're a little on the small side and can easily become difficult to see with glare from the sun or other bright lights. This is also worsened by the fact that the silvering might not be fully intact on the mirrors due to them being 80 or 90 years old, such as seen on this example here. The lenses on these aren't super sharp, and the minimum focus distance of 5 feet isn't ideal, though it does seem to be fairly common for lenses of this focal length found on many cameras of the era. The film situation isn't ideal either, as although the 6x9 negatives have great resolution, they do come with the trade-off that you'll only get 8 images per roll, increasing your film costs. Also, the fact that it's a 620 camera, meaning you'll have to either trim down your 120 spools or re-roll your film onto 620 spools, definitely adds some unwanted hassle. However, despite all this camera's flaws, limitations, and failings, of which there are many, I've really enjoyed working with it, and I've used it to produce some work I'm really happy with. Going back to the idea that the best camera is the one you have with you, I originally acquired this camera because I was doing some work at a living history museum where I was required to be in early 20th century dress. This meant that all my more modern cameras were off the table, and that in spite of this camera's shortcomings, it allowed me to capture a whole bunch of images I would have been otherwise unable to. Along with that, the older, simpler design of this camera also provides some unique benefits. The folding design of this camera makes it super compact and portable, to the point where it's quite easy to tuck this camera into a bag or a jacket. And the simple build means these cameras are relatively straightforward to repair, as can be seen by the replacement winding knob on my example. Even some of the more limiting features have their benefits, both as a teaching aid with regard to historical photography, helping to illustrate why many of the pictures of the past were taken the way they were, and as a tool to help you focus on creativity and technique, such as the waist-level viewfinders giving you a different perspective than you normally would, or the max aperture of f11 forcing you to focus on lighting and composition, rather than just cranking open the aperture to blur out the background. In the end, whether this camera is right or not for you will depend a lot on what you're looking to do with it. If you're looking for technical perfection, fast action, or low light performance, then I'd steer clear, as this camera is not going to give you what you want. However, if you want a historical look to your images, something portable, or just an interesting creative challenge, then you might really enjoy this camera. Overall, I've really enjoyed working with this camera, though its usefulness is best limited to certain scenarios and will depend a lot on what you're looking to get out of it.